Hey Doug,
Hey Mo,
are preacher curls good exercise?
that's a tongue twister, right?
Yeah.
Preacher curls, otherwise known as Scott curls, right? So I'll explain why they're called Scott curls in just a minute. For those that don't know, a preacher curl is an exercise that is performed on a bench that has about a 45-degree angle to it. You put your upper arms on there, and then you usually grab a barbell or dumbbells and do the exercise from that angle. And the one thing that people probably have noticed is that it's harder than a standing curl. So if you can curl, let's say, a 60-pound barbell, and you try a 60-pound barbell on a preacher curl, you go, oh, this is a lot harder. And there's a very good reason for that. And it's not a good reason. The bicep connects to the forearm limb just below the elbow in such a way that when your arm is straight, the angle of that connection is more parallel to that forearm than it is when it's bent. When it's bent, it's perpendicular to the forearm, right? Well, that is something that we call mechanical advantage or disadvantage. Mechanical advantage is when a muscle can pull on its limb perpendicularly. That means that all of that muscle's force is being used productively in pulling that limb toward the origin. But when your arm is straight, you want the arm to go this way, but you're not pulling in this way, you're pulling this way because you're pulling from the origin, right? So it's pulling in this direction, and so that means that it has to use much more force, 7, 8, 9 times more force to create that elbow bending than it would have to do right here. Okay, so imagine that you're doing a standing curl with a 60-pound barbell. When you're standing and that forearm is vertical, the bicep doesn't have any load at all. Doesn't matter that you're holding 60 pounds, right? But when you have your arm straight on a preacher curl, it's already like literally bending your elbow backward. And as soon as you start, just to start the movement, you're getting an enormous amount of resistance. If we want to calculate it, we can say, all right, let's play with some numbers. 60 pounds times 12, which is the length of the forearm, times about, 800%. Imagine 60 times 12 times 800. That's a lot.
That's a lot. Can't do the math.
Right? It's well over 1,000 pounds. Now your bicep and your bicep tendon. So the risk of tearing a bicep tendon or a bicep during a preacher curl is huge. In fact, almost everyone I know that has torn their bicep, and I suggest you ask them, they often say during the preacher curl or during the deadlift.
Yeah, the reverse.
On the reverse grip, right? So the point is this, is that the forearm lever is the lever that is being operated by the bicep. So when we're looking at a resistance curve, which means the amount of resistance that the bicep is getting through its range of motion, when you're doing it mathematically, you say, well, this is the amount of weight, this is the length of the lever, which is a magnifier, and this is the angle of that limb relative to gravity, right? In most cases, well, in all cases, even the bicep, but in most cases, it's simple to calculate because you say the early phase should be heavier than the later phase. Muscles are stronger when they're elongated and weaker when they're shortened, okay? But you have to factor in that mechanical disadvantage. So you're getting a tremendous amount of increased load in the beginning of the range of motion of a curl just because your elbow is starting straight. So when you're standing, doing a standing barbell curl, and you move your forearm just a little bit, even when your forearm just goes like to a 5-degree angle, you're already getting a very large load on the bicep because of the mechanical disadvantage added to the magnifying length of the forearm. So if you're looking at a tricep or some of these muscles that don't ever experience the other extremes, mechanical advantage and disadvantage, they always have mechanical disadvantage, then the calculation is much easier. But on the biceps, on the hamstrings, on the lats, and on the pecs, we have to be careful. This is why these muscles get torn more often than any other. Pec tears, lat tears, hamstring tears, bicep tears are more common than quadricep tears, tricep tears, etc. So the preacher curl would be okay, meaning if you use that bench, but you don't use free weight. Because free weight pulls straight down. And so that straight down angle compared to the angle of your forearm is what you're trying to avoid. If you used a cable, and that cable was coming from an angle like that was parallel to your forearm in this position, now you'd be starting from a neutral position, which is what you want to do. So it's not the bench that's dangerous. It's a combination of that bench with free weight that's dangerous. And it's no more productive. That's what should be really emphasized here, is that when people do a preacher curl, they're doing it because they think it's different than or better than or produce a different result than a standard curl. And the answer is it will not. The bicep will develop the way it develops regardless of what you do. The shape of your bicep will be genetically determined. Now getting back to this Scott curl thing. Larry Scott was a bodybuilder years ago. He was one of the earliest Mr. Olympia winners. And he had very full biceps. Like the average person, when they flex their bicep, they have a little space between the bicep and the elbow. He had none. His bicep went right into his elbow. And some people really like that look. By the way, someone like Robbie Robinson, who's also sort of an 80s bodybuilder, had almost the opposite. He had a very big ball shape, right? So some people prefer that peak versus the fullness. But regardless of what you prefer, you can't choose what you want, what you get. Larry Scott used to love preacher curls. And people thought that his biceps looked that way because of that exercise. So they called it Scott curls. But I can tell you this right now. Millions and millions of people have used that exact same exercise and have never gotten arms like Larry Scott. It is not that exercise that produces that result. It is genetics. So why do an exercise that has a higher risk of injury and no additional benefit when it's easier and more effective to do a regular standing barbell or dumbbell curl? It's compromised.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.